The deeper we pressed into Anatolia, the more barren the landscape became. Villagers huddled their haphazardly stacked mud-walled shoeboxes into the groins of hills. By crowding these crevasses, they hoped to escape the worst of the unpredictable seismic tremors that had too often inflicted catastrophe upon similar flimsy structures of stone and clay. Increasing the lack of vegetation created problems for our sanitary regime. We could no longer request a stop for bushes once the bushes were no longer there. And it was pointless walking out into the wilderness if you were still visible to fellow passengers even from a distance of several hundred yards. Besides, there was the danger of running into terrifying Anatolian sheepdogs. These creatures had spiked collars like murderous bracelets and were so ferociously loyal to their flocks, their owners, and their tracts of territory that they set upon intruders like wolves. We had watched them racing towards our moving coach like avenging harpies, not just barking at, but endeavouring to sink their teeth into our spinning tyres. Meet up with one of those in your most compromising posture, and you might be left a great deal worse off than my lance corporal friend bereft of a slice of buttocks on a Korean hillside. The only sensible alternative was to arrange for relief stops in relays, miles from any village or sheep flocks, with the women retreating first to the rear of the bus and the men following when the last batch of the first batch announced the coast was clear. Magically, even here in the arid Anatolian landscape, watermelons were in season. We were following the crest of a watermelon wave that had carried us all the way from Venice and was to last us well into Iran. Stacks of these globular green fruit were sharing the rear of our bus with our luggage and our store of Chianti wine bottles. The latter were acquired in Trieste, cushioned in their raffia baskets from the damaging concussions to which they were subjected. Whenever we stopped to take turns at the Primus stove, cooking up our evening meal, Nigel and I rationed ourselves to our customary omelette, spiced with onion, green peppers, and whatever other available garnish we might improvise. It became a standing joke, our culinary staple, bequeathed the title Meserve as a compound of our two names. Finding a hillock on which to consume this dish, we would watch the sun sink over the continent left in our wake, and bastardize verses from Fitzgerald's version of the Omar Khayyam. Here, looking very much the worse for wear, a loaf of bread, a flask of wine, and thou beside me, seated in the wilderness, this wilderness can really seem a cow. It seemed almost emphatically a cow when the time came to pitch our tents. Aluminium tent pegs made little impression on a landscape compacted in fearful anticipation of the next subterranean upheaval. Mallets served only to contort these pathetic implements into misshapen metallic deformities. In despair, we would each end up winding our tent canvas around ourselves until we were entirely swaddled in its embrace. Then we would fall over, hopefully onto inflated air mattresses, which as often as not would immediately breathe their last beneath this unexpected burden. Morning would find us rolling free of our nocturnal encumbrance like Cleopatra from her carpet, just in time to pack up and seek the safety of the coach before the next sheep farmer and his faithful hounds materialized on the horizon. The road from Erzincan to Erzurum was one I would never wish to traverse again. Seldom wide enough for two vehicles to pass, it wound an infinitely convoluted course around the flanks of a spectacularly steep ravine. so perilous that we were informed it remained closed during spells of winter ice and snow. It is never a pleasant feeling to sit at the back end of a bus, directly over a wheel that leaves the road with a sickening lurch on practically every inside bend. It is even less so when you look down and see far below you the crushed remains of yet another truck or petrol tanker that took a bend too wide and too far. But Paddy, as ever, proved his driving skills were more than adequate for even this challenge. Increasingly, I learned to respect his quiet, confident manner, his unassertive but undisputable leadership, his phlegmatic acceptance of setbacks, and his resourceful application of remedies to counter them. I learned little of his background other than the fact that he had for years conducted one business or other throughout West and Central Asia, picking up languages, acquainting himself with national characteristics, learning the law of the road in each and every territory. Always he had nursed at the back of his mind an ambition to launch the first overland bus service. Having already proved his possibilities once, he was planning to establish a regular, twice-a-year timetable. He had his perfect companion in diminutive Moti, unfailingly cheerful and responsive to his every need. Before he could even voice it, seated in lotus posture on her bastion of bedroll, she would reach across and pass him cups of tea as he drove, or feed him spoonfuls of cold dal and rice. Beyond Erzurum lay Ağri, and beyond that Mount Ararat, on whose summit Noah allegedly brought his ark to rest, releasing its burden of animals to multiply and populate the land from which the biblical flood was still receding. In the shadow of that mountain, a distant descendant of the patriarch's floating menagerie, came a fraction of a centimetre from dislocating my jaw. It was my fault. Spotting a small herd of grazing camels, I crept up with my camera to avoid startling them, and so abysmally failed in my objective that one of the youngest took fright and lashed out with its back legs. Its toe grazed my lip and nearly broke my front teeth. Also in the shadow of Mount Ararat lay the Turkish-Iranian border, opening up to us a country that would, next to India itself, be the largest encountered on our journey, aside from being the most problematic and the longest to traverse. On the road to Tabriz, we stopped by a village mosque, whose kindly imam invited us to spend the night. Lying side by side, our sleeping bags set in rows on a blaze of richly embroidered carpets, we slowly succumbed to sleep, too tired to continue staring in wonderment at our surroundings. But I resisted to the last, gazing up into that mini firmament of a dome, inset with filigrees of pattern high above. I thought it the most beautiful setting in which I had ever laid my head, and for once I wanted to pray before I closed my eyes, in thanks for bringing me so far, for what the rest of the journey might bring, and beyond that, for the remainder of my life.